Chapter 33 of Lord Jim by Joseph Conrad. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Read by Peter Dan. Chapter 33. I was immensely touched. Her youth, her ignorance, her pretty beauty, which had the simple charm and the delicate vigour of a wildflower, her pathetic pleading, her helplessness, appealed to me with almost the strength of her own unreasonable and natural fear. She feared the unknown as we all do, and her ignorance made the unknown infinitely vast. I stood for it, for myself, for you fellows, for all the world that neither cared for Jim nor needed him in the least. I would have been ready enough to answer for the indifference of the teeming earth, but for the reflection that he too belonged to this mysterious unknown of her fears, and that however much I stood for, I did not stand for him. This made me hesitate. A murmur of hopeless pain unsealed my lips. I began by protesting that I at least had come with no intention to take Jim away. Why did I come then? After a slight movement she was as still as a marble statue in the night. I tried to explain briefly friendship, business. If I had any wish in the matter, it was rather to see him stay. "They always leave us," she murmured. The breath of sad wisdom from the grave which her piety wreathed with flowers seemed to pass in a faint sigh. Nothing, I said, could separate Jim from her. It is my firm conviction now. It was my conviction at the time. It was the only possible conclusion from the facts of the case. It was not made more certain by her whispering in a tone in which one speaks to oneself. "He swore this to me." "Did you ask him?" I said. She made a step nearer. No, never. She had asked him only to go away. It was that night on the river bank, after he had killed the man, after she had flung the torch in the water because he was looking at her so. There was too much light, and the danger was over then, for a little time. For a little time. He said then he would not abandon her to Cornelius. She had insisted. She wanted him to leave her. He said that he could not, that it was impossible. He trembled while he said this. She had felt him tremble. One does not require much imagination to see the scene, almost to hear their whispers. She was afraid for him too. I believe that then she saw in him only a predestined victim of dangers which she understood better than himself. Though by nothing but his mere presence he had mastered her heart, had filled all her thoughts, and had possessed himself of all her affections, she underestimated his chances of success. It is obvious that at about that time everybody was inclined to underestimate his chances. Strictly speaking, he didn't seem to have any. I know that was Cornelius's view. He confessed that much to me in extenuation of the shady part he had played in Sheriff Ali's plot to do away with the infidel. Even Sheriff Ali himself, as it seems certain now, had nothing but contempt for the white man. Jim was to be murdered mainly on religious grounds, I believe. A simple act of piety, and so far infinitely meritorious, but otherwise without much importance. In the last part of this opinion Cornelius concerned. "Honourable sir," he argued abjectly on the only occasion he managed to have me to himself. "Honourable sir, how was I to know? Who was he? What could he do to make people believe him? What did Mr. Stein mean, sending a boy like that to talk big to an old servant? I was ready to save him for $80, only $80. Why didn't the fool go? Was I to get stabbed myself for the sake of a stranger?" He grovelled in spirit before me, with his body doubled up insinuatingly and his hands hovering about my knees as though he were ready to embrace my legs. "What's $80? An insignificant sum to give to a defenceless old man ruined for life by a deceased she-devil." Here he wept. But I anticipate. I didn't that night chance upon Cornelius till I had had it out with the girl. She was unselfish when she urged Jim to leave her, and even to leave the country. It was his danger that was foremost in her thoughts, even as she wanted to save herself too, perhaps unconsciously. But then look at the warning she had, look at the lesson that could be drawn from every moment of the recently ended life in which all her memories were centred. She fell at his feet, she told me so, there by the river, in the discreet light of stars, which showed nothing except great masses of silent shadows, indefinite open spaces, and trembling faintly upon the broad stream, made it appear as wide as the sea. He had lifted her up. He lifted her up, and then she would struggle no more. Of course not. Strong arms, a tender voice, a stalwart shoulder to rest her poor lonely little head upon. The need, the infinite need of all this for the aching heart, for the bewildered mind, the promptings of youth, the necessity of the moment. What would you have? One understands, unless one is incapable of understanding anything under the sun. And so she was content to be lifted up and held. "You know, Jove, this is serious, no nonsense in it," as Jim had whispered hurriedly with a troubled, concerned face on the threshold of his house. I don't know so much about nonsense, but there was nothing light-hearted in their romance. They came together under the shadow of a life's disaster, like knight and maiden meeting to exchange vows amongst haunted ruins. The starlight was good enough for that story, a light so faint and remote that it cannot resolve shadows into shapes and show the other shore of a stream. I did look upon the stream that night, and from the very place. It rolled, silent and as black as sticks. The next day I went away, but I'm not likely to forget what it was she wanted to be saved from when she entreated him to leave her while there was time. She told me what it was, calmed. She was now too passionately interested for mere excitement, in a voice as quiet in the obscurity as her white, half-lost figure. She told me I didn't want to die weeping. I thought I had not heard that aright. "You did not want to die weeping?" I repeated after her. "Like my mother," she added readily. The outlines of her white shape did not stir in the least. "My mother had wept bitterly before she died," she explained. An inconceivable calmness seemed to have risen from the ground around us, imperceptibly, like the still rise of a flood in the night, obliterating the familiar landmarks of emotions. There came upon me, as though I had felt myself losing my footing in the midst of waters, a sudden dread, the dread of the unknown depths. She went on explaining that during the last moments, being alone with her mother, she had to leave the side of the couch, to go and set her back against the door, in order to keep Cornelius out. He desired to get in, and kept on drumming with both fists, only desisting now and again to shout huskily, "Let me in! Let me in! Let me in!" In a far corner, upon a few mats, the moribund woman, already speechless and unable to lift her arm, rolled her head over, and with a feeble movement of her hand seemed to command, "No, no." And the obedient daughter, setting her shoulders with all her strength against the door, was looking on. "The tears fell from her eyes, and then she died," concluded the girl in an imperturbable monotone, which more than anything else, more than the white statuesque immobility of her person, more than mere words could do, troubled my mind profoundly with the passive, irremediable horror of the scene. It had the power to drive me out of my conception of existence, out of that shelter each of us makes for himself to creep under in moments of danger, as a tortoise withdraws within its shell. For a moment I had a view of a world that seemed to wear a vast and dismal aspect of disorder, while, in truth, thanks to our unwearied efforts, it is as sunny an arrangement of small conveniences as the mind of man can conceive. But still, it was only a moment. I went back into my shell directly. One must, don't you know, though I seem to have lost all my words in the chaos of dark thoughts I had contemplated for a second or two beyond the pale. These came back too very soon, for words also belong to the sheltering conception of light and order which is our refuge. I had them ready at my disposal before she whispered softly, "He swore he would never leave me when we stood there alone. He swore to me." "And it is possible that you do not believe him?" I asked, sincerely reproachful, genuinely shocked. Why couldn't she believe? Wherefore this craving for incertitude, this clinging to fear, as if incertitude and fear had been the safeguards of her love? It was monstrous. She should have made for herself a shelter of inexpugnable peace out of that honest affection. She had not the knowledge, not the skill, perhaps. The night had come on apace. It had grown pitch dark where we were, so that without stirring she had faded like the intangible form of a wistful and perverse spirit. and suddenly I heard a quiet whisper again. Other men had sworn the same thing. It was like a meditative comment on some thoughts full of sadness, of awe. And she added, still lower if possible, "My father did." She paused, the time to draw an inaudible breath. Her father, too. These were the things she knew. At once I said, "Ah, but he is not like that." This, it seemed, she did not intend to dispute, but after a time the strange still whisper wandering dreamily in the air stole into my ears. "Why, is he different? Is he better? Is he—" "Upon my word of honour," I broke in, "I believe he is." We subdued our tones to a mysterious pitch. Amongst the huts of Jim's workmen, they were mostly liberated slaves from the sheriff's stockade, somebody started a shrill, drawling song. Across the river, a big fire, at Doraman's, I think, made a glowing ball, completely isolated in the night. "Is he more true?" she murmured. "Yes," I said. "More true than any other man," she repeated in lingering accents. "Nobody here," I said, "would dream of doubting his word. Nobody would dare, except you." I think she made a movement at this. "More brave," she went on, in a changed tone. "Fear will never drive him away from you," I said a little nervously. The song stopped short on a shrill note, and was succeeded by several voices talking in the distance. Jim's voice, too. I was struck by her silence. "What has he been telling you? Has he been telling you something?" I asked. There was no answer. "What is it he told you?" I insisted. "Do you think I can tell you? How am I to know? How am I to understand?" she cried at last. There was a stir. I believe she was wringing her hands. "There is something he can never forget." "So much the better for you," I said gloomily. "What is it? What is it?" She put an extraordinary force of appeal into her supplicating tone. "He says he has been afraid. How can I believe this? Am I a mad woman to believe this? You all remember something. You all go back to it. What is it? You tell me. What is this thing? Is it alive? Is it dead? I hate it. It is cruel. Has it got a face and a voice, this calamity? Will he see it? Will he hear it? In his sleep, perhaps, when he cannot see me, and then arise and go. I shall never forgive him. My mother had forgiven, but I never. Will it be a sign, a call?" It was a wonderful experience. She mistrusted his very slumbers, and she seemed to think I could tell her why. Thus a poor mortal seduced by the charm of an apparition might have tried to wring from another ghost the tremendous secret of the claim the other world holds over a disembodied soul astray amongst the passions of this earth. The very ground on which I stood seemed to melt under my feet. And it was so simple, too. But if the spirits evoked by our fears and our unrest have ever to vouch for each other's constancy before the forlorn magicians that we are, then I alone, of dwellers in the flesh, have shuddered in the hopeless chill of such a task. A sign, a call. How telling in its expression was her ignorance. A few words. How she came to know them, how she came to pronounce them, I can't imagine. Women find their inspiration in the stress of moments that for us are merely awful, absurd, or futile. To discover that she had a voice at all was enough to strike awe into the heart. Had a spurned stone cried out in pain, it could not have appeared a greater and more pitiful miracle. These few sounds wandering in the dark had made their two benighted lives tragic to my mind. It was impossible to make her understand. I chafed silently at my impotence, and Jim too, poor devil. Who would need him? Who would remember him? He had what he wanted. His very existence, probably, had been forgotten by this time. They had mastered their fates. They were tragic. Her immobility before me was clearly expectant, and my part was to speak for my brother from the realm of forgetful shade. I was deeply moved at my responsibility and at her distress. I would have given anything for the power to soothe her frail soul, tormenting itself in its invincible ignorance like a small bird beating about the cruel wires of a cage. Nothing easier than to say, "Have no fear." Nothing more difficult. How does one kill fear, I wonder? How do you shoot a spectre through the heart, slash off its spectral head, take it by its spectral throat? It is an enterprise you rush into while you dream and are glad to make your escape with wet hair and every limb shaking. The bullet is not run, the blade not forged, the man not born. Even the winged words of truth drop at your feet like lumps of lead. You require for such a desperate encounter an enchanted and poisoned shaft dipped in a lie too subtle to be found on earth. An enterprise for a dream, my masters. I began my exorcism with a heavy heart, with a sort of sullen anger in it too. Jim's voice, suddenly raised with a stern intonation, carried across the courtyard, reproving the carelessness of some dumb sinner by the riverside. "Nothing," I said, speaking in a distinct murmur. There could be nothing in that unknown world she fancied so eager to rob her of her happiness. There was nothing, neither living nor dead. There was no face, no voice, no power that could tear Jim from her side. I drew breath, and she whispered softly, "He told me so." "He told you the truth," I said. "Nothing," she sighed out, and abruptly turned upon me with a barely audible intensity of tone. "Why did you come to us from out there? He speaks of you too often. You make me afraid. Do you want him?" A sort of stealthy fierceness had crept into our hurried mutters. "I shall never come again," I said bitterly. "And I don't want him. No one wants him." "No one?" she repeated in a tone of doubt. "No one," I affirmed, feeling myself swayed by some strange excitement. "You think him strong, wise, courageous, great. Why not believe him to be true, too? I shall go tomorrow, and that is the end. You shall never be troubled by a voice from there again. This world you don't know is too big to miss him. You understand? Too big. You've got his heart in your hand. You must feel that. You must know that." "Yes, I know that," she breathed out, hard and still as a statue might whisper. I felt I had done nothing. And what is it that I had wished to do? I'm not sure now. At the time I was animated by an inexplicable ardour, as if before some great and necessary task, the influence of the moment upon my mental and emotional state. There are in all our lives such moments, such influences, coming from the outside, as it were, irresistible, incomprehensible, as if brought about by the mysterious conjunctions of the planets. She owned, as I had put it to her, his heart. She had that and everything else, if she could only believe it. What I had to tell her was that in the whole world there was no one who ever would need his heart, his mind, his hand. It was a common fate, and yet it seemed an awful thing to say of any man. She listened without a word, and her stillness now was like the protest of an invincible unbelief. What need she care for the world beyond the forests, I asked. From all the multitudes that peopled the vastness of that unknown, there would come, I assured her, as long as he lived, neither a call nor a sign for him. Never. I was carried away. Never, never. I remember with wonder the sort of dogged fierceness I displayed. I had the illusion of having got the spectre by the throat at last. Indeed, the whole real thing has left behind the detailed and amazing impression of a dream. Why should she fear? She knew him to be strong, true, wise, brave. He was all that, certainly. He was more. He was great, invincible, and the world did not want him. It had forgotten him. It would not even know him. I stopped. The silence over Patusan was profound, and the feeble dry sound of a paddle striking the side of a canoe somewhere in the middle of the river seemed to make it infinite. "Why?" she murmured. I felt that sort of rage one feels during a hard tussle. The spectre was trying to slip out of my grasp. "Why?" she repeated louder. "Tell me." And as I remained confounded, she stamped with her foot like a spoilt child. "Why? Speak." You want to know? I asked in a fury. Yes, she cried. Because he is not good enough, I said brutally. During the moment's pause, I noticed the fire on the other shore blaze up, dilating the circle of its glow like an amazed stare, and contract suddenly to a red pinpoint. I only knew how close to me she had been when I felt the clutch of her fingers on my forearm. Without raising her voice, she threw into it an infinity of scathing contempt, bitterness, and despair. "This is the very thing he said. You lie!" The last two words she cried at me in the native dialect. "Hear me out," I entreated. She caught her breath tremulously, flung my arm away. Nobody is good enough," I began with the greatest earnestness. I could hear the sobbing labour of her breath, frightfully quickened. I hung my head. What was the use? Footsteps were approaching. I slipped away without another word. End of chapter 33. Chapter 34 of Lord Jim by Joseph Conrad. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Read by Peter Dan. Chapter 34. Marlowe swung his legs out, got up quickly, and staggered a little, as though he had been set down after a rush through space. He leaned his back against the balustrade and faced a disordered array of long cane chairs. The bodies prone in them seemed startled out of their torpor by his movement. One or two sat up as if alarmed. Here and there a cigar glowed yet. Marlowe looked at them all with the eyes of a man returning from the excessive remoteness of a dream. A throat was cleared. A calm voice encouraged negligently, "Well?" "Nothing," said Marlowe with a slight start. He had told her, that's all. She did not believe him, nothing more. As to myself, I do not know whether it be just, proper, decent for me to rejoice or to be sorry. For my part, I cannot say what I believed. Indeed, I don't know to this day, and never shall probably. But what did the poor devil believe himself? Truth shall prevail, don't you know? Magna est veritas. Yes, when it gets a chance. There is a law, no doubt, and likewise a law regulates your luck in the throwing of dice. It is not justice, the servant of men, but accident, hazard, fortune, the ally of patient time, that holds an even and scrupulous balance. Both of us had said the very same thing. Did we both speak the truth, or one of us did, or neither? Marlowe paused, crossed his arms on his breast, and in a changed tone, "She said we lied. Poor soul. Well, let's leave it to chance, whose ally is time, that cannot be hurried, and whose enemy is death, that will not wait." I had retreated, a little cowed, I must own. I had tried a fall with fear itself, and got thrown. Of course. I had only succeeded in adding to her anguish the hint of some mysterious collusion, of an inexplicable and incomprehensible conspiracy to keep her forever in the dark. And it had come easily, naturally, unavoidably, by his act, by her own act. It was as though I had been shown the working of the implacable destiny of which we are the victims and the tools. It was appalling to think of the girl whom I had left standing there motionless. Jim's footsteps had a fateful sound as he tramped by without seeing me in his heavy-laced boots. "What, no lights?" he said in a loud, surprised voice. "What are you doing in the dark, you two?" Next moment he caught sight of her, I suppose. "Hello, girl!" he cried cheerily. "Hello, boy!" she answered at once with amazing pluck. This was their usual greeting to each other, and the bit of swagger she would put into her rather high but sweet voice was very droll, pretty, and childlike. It delighted Jim greatly. This was the last occasion on which I heard them exchange this familiar hail, and it struck a chill into my heart. There was the high, sweet voice, the pretty effort, the swagger, but it all seemed to die out prematurely, and the playful call sounded like a moan. It was too confoundedly awful. "What have you done with Marlowe?" Jim was asking, and then, "Gone down, has he? Funny, I didn't meet him. You there, Marlowe?" I didn't answer. I wasn't going in, not yet at any rate. I really couldn't. While he was calling me, I was engaged in making my escape through a little gate leading out upon a stretch of newly cleared ground. No, I couldn't face them yet. I walked hastily with lowered head along a trodden path. The ground rose gently. The few big trees had been felled, the undergrowth had been cut down, and the grass fired. He had a mind to try a coffee plantation there. The big hill, rearing its double summit, coal-black in the clear yellow glow of the rising moon, seemed to cast its shadow upon the ground, prepared for that experiment. He was going to try ever so many experiments. I had admired his energy, his enterprise, and his shrewdness. Nothing on earth seemed less real now than his plans, his energy, and his enthusiasm. And raising my eyes, I saw part of the moon glittering through the bushes at the bottom of the chasm. For a moment it looked as though the smooth disk, falling from its place in the sky upon the earth, had rolled to the bottom of that precipice. Its ascending movement was like a leisurely rebound. It disengaged itself from the tangle of twigs. The bare, contorted limb of some tree growing on the slope made a black crack right across its face. It threw its level rays afar as if from a cavern, and in this mournful, eclipse-like light the stumps of felled trees uprose very dark. The heavy shadows fell at my feet on all sides, my own moving shadow, and across my path the shadow of the solitary grave perpetually garlanded with flowers. In the darkened moonlight the interlaced blossoms took on shapes foreign to one's memory and colours indefinable to the eye, as though they had been special flowers gathered by no man, grown not in this world, and destined for the use of the dead alone. Their powerful scent hung in the warm air, making it thick and heavy like the fumes of incense. The lumps of white coral shone round the dark mound like a chaplet of bleached skulls, and everything around was so quiet that when I stood still, all sound and all movement in the world seemed to come to an end. It was a great peace, as if the earth had been one grave, and for a time I stood there thinking mostly of the living, who, buried in remote places out of the knowledge of mankind, still are fated to share in its tragic or grotesque miseries. In its noble struggles, too, who knows? The human heart is vast enough to contain all the world. It is valiant enough to bear the burden, but where is the courage that would cast it off? I suppose one must have fallen into a sentimental mood. I only know that I stood there long enough for the sense of utter solitude to get hold of me so completely that all I had lately seen, all I had heard, and the very human speech itself seemed to have passed away out of existence, living only for a while longer in my memory, as though I had been the last of mankind. It was a strange and melancholy illusion, evolved half-consciously, like all our illusions, which I suspect only to be visions of remote, unattainable truth, seen dimly. This was, indeed, one of the lost, forgotten, unknown places of the earth. I had looked under its obscure surface, and I felt that when tomorrow I had left it forever, it would slip out of existence, to live only in my memory, till I myself passed into oblivion. I have that feeling about me now. Perhaps it is that feeling which has incited me to tell you the story, to try to hand over to you, as it were, its very existence, its reality, the truth disclosed in a moment of illusion. Cornelius broke upon it. He bolted out vermin-like from the long grass growing in a depression of the ground. I believe his house was rotting somewhere nearby, though I've never seen it, not having been far enough in that direction. He ran towards me upon the path. His feet, shod in dirty white shoes, twinkled on the dark earth. He pulled himself up and began to whine and cringe under a tall stovepipe hat. His dried-up little carcass was swallowed up, totally lost, in a suit of black broadcloth. That was his costume for holidays and ceremonies, and it reminded me that this was the 4th Sunday I had spent in Patusan. All the time of my stay I had been vaguely aware of his desire to confide in me if he only could get me all to himself. He hung about with an eager, craving look upon his sour, yellow little face, but his timidity had kept him back as much as my natural reluctance to have anything to do with such an unsavoury creature. He would have succeeded, nevertheless, had he not been so ready to slink off as soon as you looked at him. He would slink off before Jim's severe gaze, before my own, which I tried to make indifferent, even before Tam-e-Tam's surly, superior glance. He was perpetually slinking away. Whenever seen, he was moving off deviously, his face over his shoulders, with either a mistrustful snarl or a woebegone, piteous, mute aspect. But no assumed expression could conceal this innate, irremediable abjectness of his nature, any more than an arrangement of clothing can conceal some monstrous deformity of the body. I don't know whether it was the demoralization of my utter defeat in my encounter with a spectre of fear less than an hour ago, but I let him capture me without even a show of resistance. I was doomed to be the recipient of confidences, and to be confronted with unanswerable questions. It was trying, but the contempt, the unreasoned contempt the man's appearance provoked, made it easier to bear. He couldn't possibly matter. Nothing mattered, since I had made up my mind that Jim, for whom alone I cared, had at least mastered his fate. He had told me he was satisfied, nearly. This is going further than most of us dare. I, who have the right to think myself good enough, dare not. Neither does any of you here, I suppose. Marlowe paused, as if expecting an answer. Nobody spoke. "Quite right," he began again. "Let no soul know, since the truth can be wrung out of us only by some cruel, little, awful catastrophe. But he is one of us, and he could say he was satisfied, nearly. Just fancy this, nearly satisfied. One could almost envy him his catastrophe, nearly satisfied. After this, nothing could matter. It did not matter who suspected him, who trusted him, who loved him, who hated him, especially if it was Cornelius who hated him. Yet, after all, this was a kind of recognition. You shall judge of a man by his foes as well as by his friends, and this enemy of Jim was such as no decent man would be ashamed to own, without, however, making too much of him. This was the view Jim took, and in which I shared, but Jim disregarded him on general grounds. "My dear Marlowe," he said, "I feel that if I go straight, nothing can touch me. Indeed I do. Now, you've been long enough here to have a good look round, and frankly, don't you think I'm pretty safe? It all depends upon me, and by Jove, I have a lot of confidence in myself. The worst thing he could do would be to kill me, I suppose. I don't think for a moment he would. He couldn't, you know, not if I were myself to hand him a loaded rifle for the purpose and then turn my back on him. That's the sort of thing he is. And suppose he would, suppose he could. Well, what of that? I didn't come here flying for my life, did I? I came here to set my back against the wall, and I'm going to stay here." "Till you are quite satisfied," I struck in. We were sitting at the time under the roof in the stern of his boat. 20 paddles flashed like one, 10 on a side, striking the waters with a single splash, while behind our backs Tam-be-tam dipped silently right and left, and stared right down the river, attentive to keep the long canoe in the greatest stretch of the current. Jim bowed his head, and our last talk seemed to flicker out for good. He was seeing me off as far as the mouth of the river. The schooner had left the day before, working down and drifting on the ebb, while I had prolonged my stay overnight. And now he was seeing me off. Jim had been a little angry with me for mentioning Cornelius at all. I had not, in truth, said much. The man was too insignificant to be dangerous, though he was as full of hate as he could hold. He had called me "Honourable Sir" at every second sentence, and had whined at my elbow as he followed me from the grave of his late wife to the gate of Jim's compound. He declared himself the most unhappy of men, a victim, crushed like a worm. He entreated me to look at him. I wouldn't turn my head to do so, but I could see out of the corner of my eye his obsequious shadow gliding after mine, while the moon, suspended on her right hand, seemed to gloat serenely upon the spectacle. He tried to explain, as I've told you, his share in the events of the memorable night. It was a matter of expediency. How could he know who was going to get the upper hand? "I would have saved him, Honourable Sir. I would have saved him for $80, he protested in dulcet tones, keeping a pace behind me. "He has saved himself," I said, "and he has forgiven you." I heard a sort of tittering, and turned upon him. At once he appeared ready to take to his heels. "What are you laughing at?" I asked, standing still. "Don't be deceived, Honourable Sir," he shrieked, seemingly losing all control over his feelings. "He saved himself. He knows nothing, Honourable Sir, nothing whatsoever. Who is he? What does he want here, the big thief? What does he want here? He throws dust into everybody's eyes. He throws dust into your eyes, honourable sir, but he can't throw dust into my eyes. He is a big fool, honourable sir." I laughed contemptuously, and turning on my heel began to walk on again. He ran up to my elbow and whispered forcibly, "He's no more than a little child here, like a little child, a little child." Of course, I didn't take the slightest notice, and seeing the time pressed, because we were approaching the bamboo fence that glittered over the blackened ground of the clearing, he came to the point. He commenced by being abjectly lachrymose. His great misfortunes had affected his head. He hoped I would kindly forget what nothing but his troubles made him say. He didn't mean anything by it, only the honourable sir did not know what it was to be ruined, broken down, trampled upon. After this introduction he approached the matter near his heart, but in such a rambling, ejaculatory, craven fashion that for a long time I couldn't make out what he was driving at. He wanted me to intercede with Jim in his favour. It seemed, too, to be some sort of money affair. I heard time and again the words, "moderate provision, suitable present." He seemed to be claiming value for something, and he even went the length of saying with some warmth that life was not worth living if a man were to be robbed of everything. I did not breathe a word, of course, but neither did I stop my ears. The gist of the affair, which became clear to me gradually, was in this, that he regarded himself as entitled to some money in exchange for the girl. He had brought her up, somebody else's child. Great trouble and pains, old man now. Suitable present. If the honourable sir would say a word. I stood still to look at him with curiosity, and fearful lest I should think him extortionate, I suppose, he hastily brought himself to make a concession. In consideration of a suitable present given at once, he would, he declared, be willing to undertake the charge of the girl, without any other provision, when the time came for the gentleman to go home. His little yellow face, all crumpled as though it had been squeezed together, expressed the most anxious, eager avarice. His voice whined coaxingly, "No more trouble, natural guardian, a sum of money." I stood there and marvelled. That kind of thing with him was evidently a vocation. I discovered suddenly in his cringing attitude a sort of assurance, as though he had been all his life dealing in certitudes. He must have thought I was dispassionately considering his proposal, because he became as sweet as honey. "Every gentleman made a provision when the time came to go home," he began insinuatingly. I slammed the little gate. "In this case, Mr. Cornelius," I said, "the time will never come." He took a few seconds to gather this in. "What?" he fairly squealed. "Why," I continued from my side of the gate, "haven't you heard him say so himself? He will never go home." "Oh, this is too much," he shouted. He would not address me as honoured sir any more. He was very still for a time, and then, without a trace of humility, began very low, "Never go. Ah, he comes here, devil knows from where, comes here, devil knows why, to trample on me till I die. Ah, trample!" He stamped softly with both feet. "Trample like this, nobody knows why, till I die." His voice became quite extinct. He was bothered by a little cough. He came up close to the fence and told me, dropping into a confidential and piteous tone, that he would not be trampled upon. "Patience, patience," he muttered, striking his breast. I had done laughing at him, but unexpectedly he treated me to a wild, cracked burst of it. "Ha, ha, ha! We shall see, we shall see! What? Steal from me everything, everything, everything!" His head drooped on one shoulder. His hands were hanging before him, lightly clasped. One would have thought he had cherished the girl with surpassing love, that his spirit had been crushed and his heart broken by the most cruel of spoliations. Suddenly he lifted his head and shot out an infamous word. "Like her mother! She is like her deceitful mother! Exactly! In her face, too! In her face! The devil!" He leaned his forehead against the fence, and in that position uttered threats and horrible blasphemies in Portuguese, in very weak ejaculations, mingled with miserable plaints and groans, coming out with a heave of the shoulders, as though he had been overtaken by a deadly fit of sickness. It was an inexpressibly grotesque and vile performance, and I hastened away. He tried to shout something after me, some disparagement of Jim, I believe. Not too loud, though. We were too near the house. All I heard distinctly was, "No more than a little child. A little child." End of chapter 34. Chapter 35 of Lord Jim by Joseph Conrad. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Read by Peter Dan. Chapter 35. But next morning, at the first bend of the river shutting off the houses of Patusan, all this dropped out of my sight bodily, with its colour, its design, and its meaning, like a picture created by fancy on a canvas upon which, after long contemplation, you turn your back for the last time. It remains in the memory motionless, unfaded, with its life arrested in the unchanging light. There are the ambitions, the fears, the hate, the hopes, and they remain in my mind just as I had seen them, intense and as if forever suspended in their expression. I had turned away from the picture and was going back to the world where events move, men change, light flickers, life flows in a clear stream, no matter whether over mud or over stones. I wasn't going to dive into it. I would have enough to do to keep my head above the surface. But as to what I was leaving behind, I cannot imagine any alteration. The immense and magnanimous Doraman and his little motherly witch of a wife, gazing together upon the land and nursing secretly their dreams of parental ambition. Tunku Allang, wizened and greatly perplexed. Dane Warris, intelligent and brave, with his faith in Jim, with his firm glance and his ironic friendliness. The girl, absorbed in her frightened, suspicious adoration. Tambi Tam, surly and faithful. Cornelius, leaning his forehead against the fence under the moonlight. I am certain of them. They exist as if under an enchanter's wand. But the figure around which all these are grouped, that one lives, and I am not certain of him. No magician's wand can immobilize him under my eyes. He is one of us. Jim, as I've told you, accompanied me on the first stage of my journey back to the world he had renounced, and the way at times seemed to lead through the very heart of untouched wilderness. The empty reaches sparkled under the high sun. Between the high walls of vegetation the heat drowsed upon the water, and the boat, impelled vigorously, cut her way through the air that seemed to have settled dense and warm under the shelter of lofty trees. The shadow of the impending separation had already put an immense space between us, and when we spoke it was with an effort, as if to force our low voices across a vast and increasing distance. The boat fairly flew. We sweltered side by side in the stagnant, superheated air. The smell of mud, of mush, the primeval smell of fecund earth seemed to sting our faces, till suddenly, at a bend, it was as if a great hand far away had lifted a heavy curtain, had flung open an immense portal. The light itself seemed to stir. The sky above our heads widened. A far-off murmur reached our ears. A freshness enveloped us, filled our lungs, quickened our thoughts, our blood, our regrets. And straight ahead the forest sank down against the dark blue ridge of the sea. I breathed deeply. I revelled in the vastness of the opened horizon, in the different atmosphere that seemed to vibrate with the toil of life, with the energy of an impeccable world. This sky and this sea were open to me. The girl was right. There was a sign, a call in them, something to which I responded with every fibre of my being. I let my eyes roam through space, like a man released from bonds who stretches his cramped limbs, runs, leaps, responds to the inspiring elation of freedom. "This is glorious," I cried, and then I looked at the sinner by my side. He sat with his head sunk on his breast and said, "Yes," without raising his eyes, as if afraid to see, writ large on the clear sky of the offing, the reproach of his romantic conscience. I remember the smallest details of that afternoon. We landed on a bit of white beach. It was backed by a low cliff, wooded on the brow, draped in creepers to the very foot. Below us the plain of the sea, of a serene and intense blue, stretched with a slight upward tilt to the thread-like horizon, drawn at the height of our eyes. Great waves of glitter blew lightly along the pitted dark surface, as swift as feathers chased by the breeze. A chain of islands sat broken and massive, facing the wide estuary, displayed in a sheet of pale glassy water reflecting faithfully the contour of the shore. High in the colourless sunshine a solitary bird, all black, hovered, dropping and soaring above the same spot with a slight rocking motion of the wings. A ragged, sooty bunch of flimsy mat hovels was perched over its own inverted image upon a crooked multitude of high piles the colour of ebony. A tiny black canoe put off from amongst them with 2 tiny men, all black, who toiled exceedingly, striking down at the pale water, and the canoe seemed to slide painfully on a mirror. This bunch of miserable hovels was the fishing village that boasted of the White Lord's especial protection, and the 2 men crossing over were the old headman and his son-in-law. They landed and walked up to us on the white sand, lean, dark brown as if dried in smoke, with ashy patches on the skin of their naked shoulders and breasts. Their heads were bound in dirty but carefully folded head-kerchiefs, and the old man began at once to state a complaint, voluble, stretching a lank arm, screwing up at Jim his old bleared eyes confidently. The Rajah's people would not leave them alone. There had been some trouble about a lot of turtles' eggs his people had collected on the islets there, and leaning at arm's length upon his paddle, he pointed with a brown skinny hand over the sea. Jim listened for a time without looking up, and at last told him gently to wait. He would hear him by and by. They withdrew obediently to some little distance, and sat on their heels with their paddles lying before them on the sand. The silvery gleams in their eyes followed our movements patiently, and the immensity of the outspread sea, the stillness of the coast passing north and south beyond the limits of my vision, made up one colossal presence, watching us 4 dwarfs isolated on a strip of glistening sand. "The trouble is," remarked Jim moodily, "that for generations these beggars of fishermen in that village there had been considered as the Rajah's personal slaves, and the old rip can't get it into his head that—" He paused. "That you have changed all that," I said. "Yes, I've changed all that," he muttered in a gloomy voice. "You have had your opportunity," I pursued. "Have I?" he said. "Well, yes, I suppose so, yes. I have got back my confidence in myself, a good name. Yet sometimes I wish— No, I shall hold what I've got, can't expect any more." He flung his arm out towards the sea. "Not out there, anyhow." He stamped his foot upon the sand. "This is my limit, because nothing less will do." We continued pacing along the beach. "Yes, I've changed all that," he went on, with a sidelong glance at the 2 patient, squatting fishermen. "But only try to think what it would be if I went away. Jove, can't you see it? Hell loose. No, tomorrow I shall go and take my chance of drinking that silly old Tunku Allang's coffee, and I shall make no end of fuss over these rotten turtles' eggs. No, I can't say enough. Never. I must go on forever, holding up my end, to feel sure that nothing can touch me. I must stick to their belief in me to feel safe and to— He cast about for a word, seemed to look for it on the sea. "To keep touch with—" His voice sank suddenly to a murmur. "With those whom perhaps I shall never see any more. With you, for instance." I was profoundly humbled by his words. "For God's sake," I said, "don't set me up, my dear fellow. Just look to yourself." I felt a gratitude, an affection for that straggler whose eyes had singled me out, keeping my place in the ranks of an insignificant multitude. How little that was to boast of, after all. I turned my burning face away. Under the low sun, glowing, darkened and crimson, like an ember snatched from the fire, the sea lay outspread, offering all its immense stillness to the approach of the fiery orb. Twice he was going to speak, but checked himself. At last, as if he had found a formula, "I shall be faithful," he said quietly. "I shall be faithful," he repeated, without looking at me. but for the first time letting his eyes wander upon the waters, whose blueness had changed to a gloomy purple under the fires of sunset. Ah, he was romantic. Romantic. I recalled some words of Stein's. In the destructive element immerse, to follow the dream, and again to follow the dream, and so always, usque ad finem. He was romantic, but none the less true. Who could tell what forms, what visions, what faces, what forgiveness he could see in the glow of the west? A small boat, leaving the schooner, moved slowly with a regular beat of 2 oars towards the sandbank to take me off. "And then there's Jewel," he said, out of the great silence of earth, sky, and sea, which had mastered my very thought, so that his voice made me start. "There's Jewel." "Yes," I murmured. "I need not tell you what she is to me," he pursued. "You've seen. In time she will come to understand." "I hope so," I interrupted. "She trusts me too," he mused, and then changed his tone. "When shall we meet next, I wonder?" he said. "Never, unless you come out," I answered, avoiding his glance. He didn't seem to be surprised. He kept very quiet for a while. "Goodbye, then," he said, after a pause. "Perhaps it's just as well." We shook hands, and I walked to the boat, which waited with her nose on the beach. The schooner, her mainsail set and jib sheet to windward, curvetted on the purple sea. There was a rosy tinge on her sails. "Will you be going home again soon?" asked Jim, just as I swung my leg over the gunwale. "In a year or so, if I live," I said. The forefoot grated on the sand. The boat floated. The wet oars flashed and dipped once, twice. Jim, at the water's edge, raised his voice. "Tell them," he began. I signed to the men to cease rowing, and waited in wonder. Tell who? The half-submerged sun faced him. I could see its red gleam in his eyes that looked dumbly at me. "No, nothing," he said, and with a slight wave of his hand motioned the boat away. I did not look again at the shore till I had clambered on board the schooner. By that time the sun had set. The twilight lay over the east, and the coast, turned black, extended infinitely its sombre wall that seemed the very stronghold of the night. The western horizon was one great blaze of gold and crimson in which a big detached cloud floated dark and still, casting a slaty shadow on the water beneath. And I saw Jim on the beach watching the schooner fall off and gather headway. The 2 half-naked fishermen had arisen as soon as I had gone. They were no doubt pouring the plaint of their trifling, miserable, oppressed lives into the ears of the white lord, and no doubt he was listening to it, making it his own, for was it not a part of his luck, the luck from the word go, the luck to which he had assured me he was so completely equal? They too, I should think, were in luck, and I was sure their pertinacity would be equal to it. Their dark-skinned bodies vanished on the dark background long before I had lost sight of their protector. He was white from head to foot, and remained persistently visible, with the stronghold of the night at his back, the sea at his feet, the opportunity by his side, still veiled. What do you say? Was it still veiled? I don't know. For me, that white figure in the stillness of coast and sea seemed to stand at the heart of a vast enigma. The twilight was ebbing fast from the sky above his head. The strip of sand had sunk already under his feet. He himself appeared no bigger than a child, than only a speck, a tiny white speck that seemed to catch all the light left in a darkened world. And suddenly I lost him. End of chapter 35. Chapter 36 of Lord Jim by Joseph Conrad. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Read by Peter Dan. Chapter 36. With these words Marlowe had ended his narrative, and his audience had broken up forthwith under his abstract, pensive gaze. Men drifted off the veranda in pairs or alone, without loss of time, without offering a remark, as if the last image of that incomplete story, its incompleteness itself, and the very tone of the speaker, had made discussion in vain and comment impossible. Each of them seemed to carry away his own impression, to carry it away with him like a secret. But there was only one man of all these listeners who was ever to hear the last word of the story. It came to him at home, more than 2 years later, and it came contained in a thick packet addressed in Marlowe's upright and angular handwriting. The privileged man opened the packet, looked in, then, laying it down, went to the window. His rooms were in the highest flat of a lofty building, and his glance could travel afar beyond the clear panes of glass, as though he were looking out of the lantern of a lighthouse. The slopes of the roofs glistened. The dark broken ridges succeeded each other without end, like sombre uncrested waves, and from the depths of the town under his feet ascended a confused and unceasing mutter. The spires of churches, numerous, scattered haphazard, uprose like beacons on a maze of shoals without a channel. The driving rain mingled with the falling dusk of a winter's evening, and the booming of a big clock on a tower, striking the hour, rolled past in voluminous, austere bursts of sound, with a shrill, vibrating cry at the core. He drew the heavy curtains. The light of his shaded reading lamp slept like a sheltered pool. His footfalls made no sound on the carpet. His wandering days were over. No more horizons as boundless as hope, no more twilights within the forests as solemn as temples, in the hot quest for the ever undiscovered country over the hill, across the stream, beyond the wave. The hour was striking. No more, no more. But the opened packet under the lamp brought back the sounds, the visions, the very savour of the past, a multitude of fading faces, a tumult of low voices, dying away upon the shores of distant seas, under a passionate and unconsoling sunshine. He sighed, and sat down to read. At first he saw 3 distinct enclosures. A good many pages closely blackened and pinned together, a loose square sheet of greyish paper with a few words traced in a handwriting he had never seen before, and an explanatory letter from Marlowe. From this last fell another letter, yellowed by time and frayed on the folds. He picked it up, and, laying it aside, turned to Marlowe's message, ran swiftly over the opening lines, and, checking himself, thereafter read on deliberately, like one approaching with slow feet and alert eyes the glimpse of an undiscovered country. "I don't suppose you've forgotten," went on the letter. "You alone have showed an interest in him that survived the telling of his story, though I remember well you would not admit he had mastered his fate. You prophesied for him the disaster of weariness and of disgust with acquired honour, with the self-appointed task, with the love sprung from pity and youth. You had said you knew so well that kind of thing, its illusory satisfaction, its unavoidable deception. You said also, I call to mind, that giving your life up to them meaning all of mankind with skins brown, yellow, or black in colour, was like selling your soul to a brute. You contended that that kind of thing was only endurable and enduring when based on a firm conviction in the truth of ideas racially our own, in whose name are established the order, the morality of an ethical progress. We want its strength at our backs, you had said. We want a belief in its necessity and its justice, to make a worthy and conscious sacrifice of our lives. Without it, the sacrifice is only forgetfulness. The way of offering is no better than the way to perdition. In other words, you maintain that we must fight in the ranks or our lives don't count. Possibly. You ought to know, be it said without malice, you who have rushed into 1 or 2 places single-handed and came out cleverly, without singeing your wings. The point, however, is that of all mankind Jim had no dealings but with himself, and the question is whether at the last he had not confessed to a faith mightier than the laws of order and progress. I affirm nothing. Perhaps you may pronounce after you've read. There is much truth, after all, in the common expression, under a cloud. It is impossible to see him clearly, especially as it is through the eyes of others that we take our last look at him. I have no hesitation in imparting to you all I know of the last episode that, as he used to say, had come to him. One wonders whether this was perhaps that supreme opportunity, that last and satisfying test for which I had always suspected him to be waiting before he could frame a message to the impeccable world. You remember that when I was leaving him for the last time he had asked whether I would be going home soon, and suddenly cried after me, "Tell them!" I had waited, curious, I'll own, and hopeful too, only to hear him shout, "No, nothing." That was all then, and there will be nothing more. There will be no message, unless such as each of us can interpret for himself from the language of facts, that are so often more enigmatic than the craftiest arrangement of words. He made, it is true, one more attempt to deliver himself, but that too failed, as you may perceive if you look at the sheet of greyish foolscap enclosed here. He had tried to write. Do you notice the commonplace hand? It is headed, "The Fort, Patusan." I suppose he had carried out his intention of making out of his house a place of defence. It was an excellent plan. A deep ditch, an earth wall topped by a palisade, and at the angles guns mounted on platforms to sweep each side of the square. Doraman had agreed to furnish him the guns, and so each man of his party would know there was a place of safety upon which every faithful partisan could rally in case of some sudden danger. All this showed his judicious foresight, his faith in the future. What he called "my own people," the liberated captives of the sheriff, were to make a distinct quarter of Patusan, with their huts and little plots of ground under the walls of the stronghold. Within he would be an invincible host in himself. The fort, Patusan. No date, as you observe. What is a number and a name to a day of days? It is also impossible to say whom he had in mind when he seized the pen. Stein, myself, the world at large? Or was this only the aimless, startled cry of a solitary man confronted by his fate? "An awful thing has happened," he wrote, before he flung the pen down for the first time. Look at the ink blot resembling the head of an arrow under these words. After a while he had tried again, scrawling heavily, as if with a hand of lead, another line. "I must now at once—" The pen had spluttered, and that time he gave it up. There's nothing more. He had seen a broad gulf that neither eye nor voice could span. I can understand this. He was overwhelmed by the inexplicable. He was overwhelmed by his own personality, the gift of that destiny which he had done his best to master. I send you also an old letter, a very old letter. It was found carefully preserved in his writing case. It is from his father, and by the date you can see he must have received it a few days before he joined the Patna. Thus it must be the last letter he ever had from home. He had treasured it all these years. The good old parson fancied his sailor's son. I have looked in at a sentence here and there. There is nothing in it except just affection. He tells his dear James that the last long letter from him was very honest and entertaining. He would not have him judge men harshly or hastily. There are 4 pages of it, easy morality and family news. Tom had taken orders. Carrie's husband had money losses. The old chap goes on equably trusting Providence and the established order of the universe, but alive to its small dangers and its small mercies. One can almost see him, grey-haired and serene, in the inviolable shelter of his book-lined, faded and comfortable study, where for 40 years he had conscientiously gone over and over again the round of his little thoughts about faith and virtue, about the conduct of life and the only proper manner of dying, where he had written so many sermons, where he sits talking to his boy over there on the other side of the earth. But what of the distance? Virtue is one all over the world, and there is only one faith, one conceivable conduct of life, one manner of dying. He hopes his dear James will never forget that who once gives way to temptation in the very instant hazards his total depravity and everlasting ruin. Therefore resolve fixedly never, through any possible motives, to do anything which you believe to be wrong. There is also some news of a favourite dog, and a pony which all you boys used to ride had gone blind from old age and had to be shot. The old chap invokes heaven's blessing. The mother and all the girls then at home send their love. No, there is nothing much in that yellow frayed letter fluttering out of his cherishing grasp after so many years. It was never answered, but who can say what converse he may have held with all these placid, colourless forms of men and women, peopling that quiet corner of the world as free of danger or strife as a tomb, and breathing equably the air of undisturbed rectitude. It seems amazing that he should belong to it, he to whom so many things had come. Nothing ever came to them. They would never be taken unawares, and never be called upon to grapple with fate. Here they all are, evoked by the mild gossip of the father, all these brothers and sisters, bone of his bone and flesh of his flesh, gazing with clear, unconscious eyes, while I seem to see him, returned at last, no longer a mere white speck at the heart of an immense mystery, but of full stature, standing disregarded amongst their untroubled shapes, with a stern and romantic aspect, but always mute, dark, under a cloud. The story of the last events you will find in the few pages enclosed here. You must admit that it is romantic beyond the wildest dreams of his boyhood, and yet there is to my mind a sort of profound and terrifying logic in it, as if it were our imagination alone that could set loose upon us the might of an overwhelming destiny. The imprudence of our thoughts recoils upon our heads. Who toys with the sword shall perish by the sword. This astounding adventure, of which the most astounding part is that it is true, comes on as an unavoidable consequence. Something of the sort had to happen. You repeat this to yourself while you marvel that such a thing could happen in the year of grace before last. But it has happened, and there is no disputing its logic. I put it down here for you as though I had been an eyewitness. My information was fragmentary, but I fitted the pieces together, and there is enough of them to make an intelligible picture. I wonder how he would have related it himself. He has confided so much in me that at times it seems as though he must come in presently and tell the story in his own words, in his careless yet feeling voice, with his offhand manner, a little puzzled, a little bothered, a little hurt, but now and then by a word or a phrase giving one of these glimpses of his very own self that were never any good for the purposes of orientation. It's difficult to believe he will never come. I shall never hear his voice again, nor shall I see his smooth, tan and pink face with a white line on the forehead, and the youthful eyes darkened by excitement to a profound, unfathomable blue. End of chapter 36.